President Cyril Ramaphosa has been speaking at the COP27 conference in Egypt today. Developed and developing nations trying to meet and resolve the climate crisis. Already key issues coming out from this. There are issues around financing, around how to limit global temperatures, and around the just transition. Dr. Vishwas Satgar is from the Climate Justice Charter movement. Dr. Satgar, good afternoon to you. Do you have any hope at all that this gathering, this COP conference, will actually lead to real change?
So, Stephen, what's important to bring into the conversation are some of the important studies that have been put out around this COP. The first is the UNEP report, the Emissions Gap Report, which is a regular report that comes out before these COPs, with it underlining that current commitments are going to take us to an over 2 degrees Celsius overshoot. And that's very, very telling in terms of what kind of will, what kind of political commitment you really have at the heart of this process. The other very, very important report that has come out is from Columbia University, and this was about a few months ago, also modeling the kind of nationally determined commitments that came out of Glasgow. And essentially that will only amount to about a 9% cut of emissions by 2030. More recently, I think over the past 24 hours, the World Meteorological Organization put out a very, very important study, again raising the alarm bell very loudly, saying that the past 8 years on record have basically been lost years and so on. So essentially, we have these documents speaking to the lack of political will, the lack of committed leadership to driving and solving this problem. Now, at the same time, I think it's very, very important for us to understand the geopolitical context in which this COP is happening. Biden emerged in the White House and, kind of positioned himself in the United States as a kind of leader on the climate problem post-Trump. But interestingly enough, his Inflation Reduction Act, which only garnered about $369 billion, is really a flash in the pan. He put in over $800 billion into his military spend. The Watson Institute at Brown University talks about $3 trillion spent on the invasion of Iraq. You look at bank bailouts that happened in the United States. In other words, you have a president from the United States, the most powerful Western democracy, what's left of it anyways, kind of speaking to the world on this platform, but yet not coming with a very, very serious commitment. The European governments are basically exposing themselves as also being very, very hypocritical. The addiction to cheap gas and oil from Russia has been exposed. And it's not as though they are bending the stick the other way. Yes, there's a sort of Europe-build program around renewable energy, but right now they're trying to line up investments, particularly in our continent, for more oil and gas extraction and to continue their addiction. You have very serious rivalries at a global level also cutting through this COP between the United States and China. And again, the Americans believe that the more you can squeeze the Chinese on a host of economic fronts, you can get them to cooperate on climate. So you have that kind of coming through. But you also have vulnerable states kind of leading, I would argue, some of the most salient issues in this COP process, and we could maybe talk about that.
I'm going to come back to that. One of the things about this is money. If someone gave us R1 trillion, we could probably do a just transition quite quickly, like in 5 years. We could probably move away from coal. We could look after communities in Mpumalanga. We could have a lot more solar, a lot more wind, a lot more, etc. But R1 trillion is R1 trillion, and I don't have R1 trillion, and Dr. Satgar, I'm presuming you don't either. The point I'm trying to get to is that this is about money, and it's about financing. And what you maybe really need, forget nation states for a moment, is global capital, whatever that may be, to sort of understand that.
So let's look at this process, okay? Since the Paris Agreement, and some would say even before that, there has been a very, very serious debate, actually, around climate debt as the basis for financing around this problem. And basically, the Western countries that are historically responsible have shied away from this at every turn. The fund that was set up, the Green Climate Fund that was set up, was meant to garner $100 billion per annum. And right now, it's nowhere near that. Okay? So you have a very, very serious problem there. I think the second very, very important issue about finance that we have to really grapple with is the issue of loss and damages. And again, it's the vulnerable island states that are raising this very, very sharply in this COP. They know that they are facing extinction as cultures, as peoples, as physical territories. And so they are very, very, very consciously making this argument. Of course, there are other countries in the global south that are not responsible for this problem. Countries like Pakistan that have just been hit very, very hard. A third of that country flooded. And then, of course, Nigeria, also over 1 million people being displaced. I mean, all of these countries are now kind of very serious about wanting loss and damages institutionalized in the climate negotiations. The hope is there will be a fund that comes into place that can cover physical costs and economic loss of countries in the global south that have lost. And again, at the Glasgow COP, Western countries can pull back from this. Now, the third issue is, of course, what Chris Yellen mentioned, and of course, what you talking about, this hypothetical. Now, South Africa has been kind of the target, if you like, of pilot funding to kind of accelerate and catalyze its just energy transition. Of course, this is a very, very important development, but there's certain concerns around this that, again, we got to bring into view. The South African government is actually Janus-faced. On the one hand, it is approaching this financing in a very opportunistic way, while we all know that it is still committed to offshore oil and gas extraction. It's in its energy resource plan still committed to a coal-heavy energy mix, etc. This doesn't add up. But I think most importantly, what's viewed by this is that we don't really have the serious precondition in place in this country for our state to engage with the world. What am I talking about? We don't have a national development plan that is actually a climate emergency plan that has been developed bottom up by all of us to say this is where we need to position the country, and that's guiding the imperatives around how we crowd in finance. I think the second issue that's very, very important that's missing here is a rethinking around our integrated resource plan. We've made nationally determined commitments to cut our emissions dramatically in keeping with a 1.5 degrees Celsius target. But again, we have, as I said, a coal-heavy energy resource plan through 2030. Those things need to be realigned. The third precondition that's missing in all of this is serious just transition plans in some of the core institutions at the heart of our energy economy. Here I'm talking about Sasol and Eskom. I mean, Komati has been decommissioned, but from the trade unions we work with, etc., the workers were not brought into that process. So already this is a very much a top-down speak process, and it's really not ensuring a just transition is embedded. The last thing that's missing, of course, and it's a major trust deficit when it comes to money, is confronting the criminalization of our state and our politics. And yes, the Zondo Commission, and yes, the president has issued his response, etc. But it's still early days, and we're dealing with systemic and we're dealing with embedded corruption and criminalization of politics in South Africa. And so these preconditions that I'm talking about need to be the basis of even a hypothetical 1 trillion rands that comes to us.
There's so much to look at here. The other question, and very quickly if we can, Doctor, is that some countries like Germany, who are moving green, are now suddenly using more coal again because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that must weaken the entire climate change argument. You can't go to a developing country and say, well, as a developed country, we're using more coal.
I mean, it's clear that, these European countries have not been concerted about the just transition, and particularly the renewable energy transition. I mean, Germany, more than most countries, has attempted to diversify its energy mix, bringing on stream wind and offshore wind particularly, and even its renewable energy revolution from the 70s was really path-breaking. But again, it's really come short. And that's being revealed in this moment. And of course, the argument being made is that, bringing back coal, etc., is very short term, and it's about trying to manage this crisis, this fallout from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But we do know that the Western governments are also looking to Africa. There's 400 billion in the queue for more oil and gas extraction.
Doctor?
Now, this is going to be devastating for the world if that happens.
Dr. Vishwas Satgar, thank you from the Climate Justice Charter Movement. Really appreciate the time.